March 10th, 1942. The dim glow of a single desk lamp pierced the haze of cigarette smoke in a fortified bunker beneath the streets of Berlin. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp concrete and machine oil, undercut by the sharp tang of fresh ink on paper. Colonel Hans Fischer, his uniform crisp despite the late hour, leaned over a cluttered desk, his fingers tracing the edges of a telegram encoded in the Lorenz machine's intricate dance of keys and rotors. The room's only sound was the rhythmic clack of a distant typewriter from the outer office, echoing like a heartbeat in the subterranean lair. Fischer's eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, narrowed as he fed the perforated tape into the cipher machine. Tunny, they called it in hushed tones among the high command, short for the Lorenz SZ-40, a beast of engineering that promised unbreakable secrecy. No more Enigma vulnerabilities, no more whispers of Allied codebreakers nipping at their heels. This was the future, 12 wheels spinning in synchronized chaos, generating keys from teleprinter impulses that shifted like sand in a storm. He pressed the start lever, and the machine whirred to life, its gears grinding softly as it encrypted the message: orders for the Eastern Front, troop movements that could turn the tide at Stalingrad. Secure as the Reich itself, Fischer muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Klaus Werner, who stood rigidly at attention nearby. Werner nodded, his young face pale under the fluorescent flicker, but inside, doubt flickered like a faulty bulb. The Germans had poured resources into Tunny after Enigma's close calls, those damn Polish mathematicians and their bomber replicas. But this, Lorenz, was a teleprinter cipher for the Führer's innermost circle, used only for the most vital links between Berlin and the front lines. Hitler himself had approved its rollout, boasting in a rare briefing that it rendered enemy ears deaf. Outside the bunker, the night air bit cold against the snow-dusted streets of the capital. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a reminder of the RAF's growing boldness. But down here, in the belly of the beast, Fischer felt invincible. He handed the encrypted tape to Werner. "Deliver this to the OKW Signal Corps at once. Let the Bolsheviks chew on that." Werner saluted and vanished into the corridor, his boots echoing on the iron stairs. Meanwhile, across the channel, in the sleepy Buckinghamshire countryside, another machine stirred under very different circumstances. Bletchley Park's Hut 11 was a wooden prefab slapped together amid manicured lawns and whispering oaks, its interior a frenzy of chalkboards, humming fans, and the acrid smell of overheated valves. It was just past midnight when Major Tommy Flowers, his sleeves rolled up to reveal grease-streaked forearms, wiped sweat from his brow with a rag. The air buzzed with the low hum of prototype electronics, nothing like the mechanical clatter of Turing's bombs in Hut 8, but something wilder, born of Flowers' obsession with thermionic valves. Flowers wasn't a codebreaker by trade. He was a post office engineer, the kind who fixed telephone lines under rainy skies. But war had dragged him into this madhouse where mathematicians scribbled equations that looked like hieroglyphs. Tonight, he tinkered with a rack of over 2,500 valves, wired into a colossal framework that dwarfed the room. Colossus, he called it in private, after the ancient statues guarding forgotten secrets. It wasn't ready yet, not for the full fury of Tunny, but the first intercepts had arrived weeks ago, smuggled from Y stations along the coast, where radio operators plucked German teleprinter signals from the ether. You can almost feel the tension coiling in that hut, can't you? The floorboards creak under your feet as you imagine stepping in, the heat radiating from those glowing tubes like a forge. Flowers adjusted a dial, sparks dancing briefly across his fingers. "If we can parallel process the wheel patterns," he explained to his assistant, a wiry wren named Joan Clark, who hovered nearby with a notepad. Clark, her hair pinned back severely, nodded, her mind racing through the combinatorial nightmare of Tunny's 12 wheels, 5 key generators, each with hundreds of possible settings. The signals had started trickling in months earlier. On a foggy January morning in 1942, a Y station at Chicksands had captured the first burst, garbled teleprinter chatter between Berlin and a command post in occupied France. It wasn't Enigma's punchy Morse. This was the steady pulse of 5-bit Bordeaux code, meant for high-level traffic only. The codebreakers at Bletchley had dubbed it Fish in their whimsical naming scheme, and Tunny for the German side's Geheimfernschreiber. But cracking it, that was a beast of a different color. Back in Berlin, dawn crept over the city like a reluctant spy. Fischer emerged from the bunker into the grey light, lighting a cigarette as he watched a column of Wehrmacht trucks rumble past. The High Command believed Tunny invulnerable. Its wheels changed daily, patterns derived from obscure teleprinter stats, and the sheer volume of possibilities dwarfed Enigma's 4 rotors. General Alfred Jodl had laughed off concerns in a staff meeting, slapping the table. The Allies chase shadows with their little puzzles. Tunny is our sword in the dark. Yet whispers persisted. Intelligence reports hinted at British listening posts, vans with trailing wires snaking through hedges. Fischer crushed his cigarette under his boot, steeling himself. The Eastern Front demanded precision. One leaked order could unravel the pincer at Stalingrad. He turned back to the bunker entrance, the iron door clanging shut behind him like a vault sealing secrets. At Bletchley, Flowers powered down for the night, the valves cooling with a sigh. Clark lingered, her pencil tapping against the intercept log. The first breaks had come slowly. Han methods, cribs based on known German phrasing like Heil Hitler or weather reports. But Tunny's depth defied manual assault. It needed a machine to brute force the wheels in real time. Flowers had sketched it on napkins, electronic counters mimicking the cipher's logic, reading punch tapes at 5,000 characters a second. The War Office scoffed at the cost, 10,000 for valves alone. But Churchill's inner circle had greenlit it in secret, under the umbrella of Ultra, that innocuous code word masking the Allies' cryptographic crown jewel. As the first hints of sunrise filtered through Bletchley's blackout curtains, Clark jotted a note, possible wheel setting for the PSI wheels. It was a thread, thin as spider silk, but enough to pull. In the distance, a nightingale called, oblivious to the invisible war raging in code and countercode. By midday, the first Colossus prototype flickered to life in a test run. Flowers watched the tape spool through, lights blinking in frantic Morse across the panel. No full decrypt yet, just patterns emerging from noise, like voices from a storm. Werner's tape, winging its way to the front via courier plane, carried orders that would reposition an entire panzer division. Unbeknownst to Fischer, those same words were already echoing faintly in Hut 11's ether. The High Command's faith in Tunny burned bright, but cracks were forming. In the quiet calculus of Bletchley, a Colossus stirred, its eyes opening to the German dark. June 1942. The sweltering heat of a makeshift workshop in Dollis Hill, a nondescript suburb north of London, pressed down like a lead blanket. Sweat beaded on Tommy Flower's forehead as he hunched over a tangle of wires, snaking across a scarred wooden bench, the air thick with the ozone tang of soldering irons and the faint, acrid bite of melting insulation. Outside, the drone of wartime traffic, lorries rumbling toward distant factories, filtered through the open windows, but inside, the world narrowed to the glow of vacuum tubes flickering like hesitant fireflies. Flowers, his shirt sleeves frayed from endless adjustments, paused to light a cigarette, the flame casting shadows across his lined face. This wasn't Bletchley anymore. The post office labs here offered space for the beast he was birthing, away from the prying eyes of Turing's mechanical purists. You can sense the frustration building, can't you? The way the valves hiss and pop under strain, each failure a setback in the race against an invisible enemy. Flowers exhaled smoke toward the ceiling fans, which whirred lazily overhead, stirring papers scribbled with circuit diagrams. His team, a ragtag crew of engineers and wrens on loan from the Signals Corps, huddled around a prototype rack, taller than a man and wider than a double bed. Colossus marked the firm, they whispered, though officially it was just experimental equipment on the manifests. Over 1,800 thermionic valves now, each one a fragile glass sentinel prone to burnout from the slightest surge. "Steady on," Flowers murmured to his lead technician, Max Newman, a mathematician borrowed from Bletchley, whose spectacles perpetually fogged in the heat. Newman nodded, his fingers deftly swapping a faulty tube, the click of its socket echoing like a chambered round. The impetus had spiked weeks earlier, after that first intercept from Chicksands. The Y-station operators, hunkered in their coastal vans with antennas like skeletal fingers reaching skyward, had snagged a juicy one. A Tunny burst from Berlin to Athens, coordinating U-boat resupply in the Mediterranean. The tape arrived at Bletchley wrapped in brown paper, its 5-bit pulses a riddle wrapped in steel. Joan Clark had pored over it in Hut 11, her pencil scratching out probable cribs. German clichés like sofort ausführen or coordinates masked as weather data. But Tunny's 12 wheels mocked them, chi, psi and mu generators churning through 1025 possibilities far beyond the bomb's grasp. Manual methods yielded fragments, a wheel pattern here, a key stream there, but the full message slipped away like fog. Flowers had argued fiercely in a cramped War Office meeting that spring, his Cockney accent cutting through the brass hat's skepticism. "Electronics, gentlemen, not gears and pins. We process in parallel, read the tape at speed, and test hypotheses faster than a Spitfire climbs." The room, panelled in oak and reeking of pipe tobacco, had fallen silent as he unrolled blueprints showing counters that mimicked Tunny's logic. Adders for the chai stream, subtractors for PSI, all wired to light up valid decryptions on a bank of neon bulbs. Admiral John Godfrey, MI6's chief, had leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Cost be damned, Flowers. If this cracks fish, it shortens the war." Funding flowed, secret slush from the ultrapot, and Dollis Hill became a forge. Back in Berlin, the illusion of security held firm. July sun baked the pavements outside the Reich Chancellery, where Colonel Hans Fischer now reported directly to the signals chief, General Erich Feldgiebel. The bunker had expanded, its corridors lined with humming Lorenz machines, each SZ-42 an upgrade on the original, faster rotors, encrypted indicators to thwart cribs. Fischer reviewed logs in a vaulted room lit by harsh bulbs, the air cool and metallic. "Intercepts minimal," he told Feldgiebel, a stern figure with a dueling scar whitening his cheek. "The English chase Enigma ghosts. Tunny's depth ensures it." Feldgiebel grunted approval, signing off on expanded use, now linking OKW to Rommel's Africa Corps, vital orders for the push on Tobruk. A fresh tape spooled out, encrypted with today's wheel settings, PSI wheels offset by 17, MU by 42, carried by motorcycle courier to a transmitter in occupied Holland. But doubt gnawed at the edges. A captured SOE agent had babbled about listening vans before the Gestapo silenced him, and Feldgiebel's analysts noted anomalies, slight delays in Allied responses, as if shadows anticipated their moves. "Coincidence," Fischer insisted, though his hand trembled slightly as he lit another cigarette. Outside, children played in the scant shade of bombed-out lots, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the war machine's grind. At Dollis Hill, breakthrough teased like lightning on the horizon. By late July, the first full rack stood assembled, cables draped like vines over its frame. Flowers flipped the master switch, and the room thrummed to life. Valves warming with a collective sigh, fans accelerating to a roar that drowned the distant air raid sirens. A test tape, dummy data mimicking Tunny, fed through the photoelectric reader, slots in the paper triggering circuits at 5,000 characters per second. Lights danced across the panel, red for mismatch, green for alignment. Newman's voice rose over the din. "Wheelchi 1 aligning, PSI Delta at 23. Clark, visiting from Bletchley with a real intercept under her arm, watched transfixed, the heat forgotten as patterns emerged. The machine chewed through combinations that would take a human team months, spitting out a partial decrypt. Panzergruppe advanced to El Alamein. Supplies via Tripoli. You feel the electric thrill, don't you? The way the air crackles, not just from the tubes but from possibility, as if the very walls lean in to listen. Flowers punch the air, his ragtag team erupting in muffled cheers. No victory bells yet, but a crack in the fortress. The decrypt confirmed Rommel's feint, feeding straight to Ultra's distribution. A red-tabbed folder to Churchill's map room by dawn. Yet Colossus faltered on the full depth. Moo wheels evaded, overheating valves with false trails. "Iterate," Flowers barked, diving back in. Sleeves rolled higher. Nights blurred into days, rations of tea and biscuits fueling the frenzy. In Berlin, August brought scorched earth heat, and Fisher oversaw a Tunny link to the Atlantic Wall. Orders for U-boat wolf packs, coordinates for convoy hunts off Halifax, encrypted and dispatched. The machines were a symphony of confidence. Feldgiebel patted his shoulder. Untouchable hands, the Führer sleeps soundly. But across the channel, in Dollis Hill's sweat-soaked lab, Colossus growled back to life, its neon eyes narrowing on the next tape. A real Tunny signal, fresh from a Y station at Beaumanoir, Berlin to a submarine pen in Brest. Flowers adjusted the bedstead switches, named for their resemblance to brass bed frames, and the beast lunged. Green lights bloomed. "Full PSI break!" Clark shouted, scribbling furiously. The decrypt unspooled. Wolfpack positions, sail dates, even fuel loads. Ultra's secret pulse stronger, a vein of intelligence that would bleed the Kriegsmarine dry. Flowers stepped back, wiping his hands, the cigarette forgotten and smouldering on the bench. The High Command's sword dulled in the dark, unaware that a Colossus had tasted blood. In the quiet aftermath, as the fans cooled the air, Newman murmured, "This changes everything." And in the distance, the war's thunder rolled closer. January 1943. The frost-crusted roads of rural Buckinghamshire wound like frozen veins under a leaden sky, the air sharp with the bite of winter wind slicing through the canvas sides of a requisitioned lorry. Inside the rumbling vehicle, Tommy Flowers gripped the edge of a wooden crate, his knuckles white against the splintered wood as the beast within shifted with every pothole. Colossus Mark I, now a hulking assembly of racks, cables and over 2,400 glowing valves, had been dismantled at Dollis Hill under cover of night, its components shrouded in tarps to evade any prying eyes from Luftwaffe reconnaissance. The journey from London suburbs to Bletchley felt eternal, the engine's growl a constant companion to Flowers' racing thoughts. Snow flurries danced outside the windscreen, blurring the hedgerows, while inside, the faint ozone scent of packed electronics mingled with the diesel fumes leaking from the floorboards. You can almost taste the urgency, can't you? The way the cold seeps through your coat, mirroring the chill of uncertainty as the lorry bounces toward its destination. Flowers glanced at Max Newman beside him, the mathematician's face etched with fatigue under his woolen scarf. "She'll hold," Flowers said, more to convince himself than Newman. The prototype had proven itself in Dollis Hill's sweltering tests, cracking partial Tunny depths, feeding Ultra with fragments that had already nudged Allied shipping routes away from lurking wolf packs. But full operational fury? That demanded Bletchley's resources, endless tapes from Y stations, the brain trust of Hut 11, and secrecy tighter than a submariner's hatch. Arrival came at dusk, the lorry grinding to a halt outside Block F, Bletchley's newest addition, a squat brick building camouflaged amid the evergreens, its windows blacked out against the blackout. Wrens in greatcoats swarmed like efficient bees, unloading crates under arc lights that hummed softly in the gathering dark. Joan Clark directed the effort, her breath fogging the air as she checked manifests. "Valves first, handle with care, or we'll be chasing sparks till spring." Flowers supervised the reassembly, his hands raw from the cold as engineers bolted frames into place. The room filled with the clatter of tools and muffled curses, the air warming gradually from the stoves crackling in the corners. By midnight, Colossus stood reborn, a monolithic wall of circuitry, its photoelectric tape reader poised like a predator's maw, bedstead switches gleaming under the shaded bulbs. Across the North Sea, in the steel bowels of a concrete U-boat pen at Lorient, France, the contrast couldn't have been starker. The air reeked of salt water and diesel, undercut by the metallic tang of oiled machinery. Captain Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, veteran of a dozen patrols, his iron cross pinned to a salt-stiffened tunic, paced the narrow gangway of U-99, his boots echoing on the wet deck. Floodlights pierced the gloom overhead, illuminating the conning tower, where signalmen fed a fresh Tunny tape into the Lorenz SSZ-42. The machine, bolted to a vibration-dampened table, whirred to life, its 12 wheels, chi, psi, mu, spinning in encrypted harmony. Orders from Berlin, rendezvous coordinates for Wolfpack Eisvogel, a dozen boats to ambush convoy HX-224 off Newfoundland. Secure as the Atlantic depths, Kretschmer muttered to his first officer, Lieutenant Zur Karl Dönitz Jr., who monitored the encryption with a stopwatch. The tape spooled out, perforated with 5-bit impulses, ready for transmission via high-frequency radio to the pack's command boat. Kretschmer lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the draught from the pen's massive doors, which groaned open to reveal the churning Bay of Biscay. Enigma had served them well once, but losses mounted, Allied escorts appearing like ghosts, depth charges blooming too close. Tunny was the upgrade, reserved for Admiralty-level Wolfpack directives, its complexity a shield against the codebreakers' probes. Admiral Karl Dönitz himself had insisted on it in a Berlin briefing, his voice gravelly over the static. No more leaks. This binds the pack unbreakable. Kretschmer exhaled smoke toward the bulkhead, watching the signalman key the burst. The message arced skyward, invisible threads weaving through the ether toward waiting antennas in England. Back at Bletchley, the first live run ignited just after dawn on January 15th. Flowers flipped the master switch in Block F, and Colossus awoke with a symphony of hums and clicks, valves igniting in cascades of blue light, fans whirring to life like distant propellers. The air grew thick with heat and the faint buzz of electricity, chalk dust from nearby blackboards swirling in the drafts. A fresh tape from Beaumanoir Y station clattered through the reader. The very Lorient burst, captured mid-transmission, its pulses a jumbled storm of chi and psi encryptions. Clark fed in cribs, predicted phrases like rendezvous grid AJ-47, while Newman adjusted the counter settings, his fingers flying over the brass switches. Tension coiled in the room like a spring, the team's faces illuminated by the machine's glow. You feel it pressing in, don't you? The sweat beading despite the winter chill outside, every tick of the clock a heartbeat in the silence, broken only by the tape's relentless feed. Flowers paced, his pipe clenched unlit between his teeth. Parallel on the Mu wheels, test Delta 12 through 18. Lights flickered across the panel, reds flashing failures, greens teasing alignments. Then a cascade, neon bulbs blooming in sequence, the decryptor typewriter clacking to life. Eisvogel, U-99 lead, intercept HX-224 at 48 north, 42 west. Clark's voice rose, triumphant, as the full text unspooled, positions, speeds, even torpedo allocations. The impact rippled outward like a depth charge. By noon, the decrypt reached the Admiralty's ops room in Whitehall, a vaulted chamber alive with plotting rods and waifs in crisp uniforms. Commodore Roger Wynne, Ultra's liaison, traced the Wolfpack's fan on the chart table, his pipe smoke curling toward the ventilation shafts. Redirect on 166 north, evade at all costs. Convoy signals flashed from the wireless masts, merchant captains altering course under stormy skies, their hulls slicing through grey swells, unaware of the invisible salvation. HX-224 steamed on, untouched, its Liberty ships laden with tanks for the coming Tunisian push. In Lorient, Kretschmer waited in vain. Days blurred into a fog of radio silence. No sightings, no contacts. Frustration etched his face as he scanned horizon after empty horizon from U-99's bridge, the salt spray stinging his eyes. "Ghosts!" he growled to Donitz Jr., who relayed queries back via Enigma fallback. Berlin's response was curt. "Proceed independently. Interference suspected, weather?" But in the High Command's bunkers, unease stirred. Colonel Hans Fischer, now promoted to Signals Oberst, reviewed logs in a smoke-filled OKW chamber, the air heavy with the scent of sauerkraut from a hasty lunch. General Feldgiebel loomed over his shoulder, dueling scar-twitching. "Anomalies again, Hans. 3 packs evaded this month. Is Tunny compromised?" Fischer shook his head, though doubt gnawed deeper. Impossible. Wheels randomized daily, depths impenetrable. He dispatched a secure memo, ironically via Tunny, to enhance Mu wheel variances, the machine in the adjacent room obliging with its familiar whir. Yet the cracks widened. Ultra's vein pulsed stronger. Colossus, now tuned, devoured tapes at a voracious clip, breaking 90% of daily fish traffic by February's end. Flowers watched from Block F's doorway one evening, the machine's lights dancing like St. Elmo's fire, as Clark logged another Wolfpack decrypt. "They're blind now," she whispered, the winter wind rattling the blackout blinds. In the Atlantic's churning depths, U-99 ghosted alone, Kretschmer's luck ebbing like the tide. The Colossus had read the dark, and the High Command's untouchable sword bent under the weight of unseen eyes. Thunder rumbled distant, not from storms, but from the war's inexorable turn. April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above the Normandy coast, the roar of Merlin engines drowned the slipstream's howl as a formation of B-17 flying fortresses sliced through the chill upper air, their aluminum skins glinting dully under a high veil of cirrus clouds. The lead bomber, Memphis Belle, shuddered from flak bursts blooming like black flowers far below, the acrid stench of cordite seeping into the waist gunner's blister despite the oxygen masks. Sergeant Quinn Harper, his gloved hands gripping the twin 50 caliber Brownings, scanned the patchwork of fields and hedgerows through frost-rimed plexiglass, heart pounding against his flight suit. The target, a Luftwaffe airfield near Caen. But the real prize lay hidden, disrupting supply lines fed by those unbreakable codes from Berlin. You can feel the vibration thrumming through your bones, can't you? The cold biting at exposed skin, every rivet groaning as the bomb bay doors creak open, ready to unleash hell on runways that serviced fighters preying on Atlantic convoys. Captain Vince Evans, the pilot, barked orders over the interphone, his voice crackling amid the din. "Steady on, Bear in 270. Flax light today, boys. Ultra says the patrols are thin." Ultra, that whispered talisman among the brass, a code word for intel that turned guesses into gospel. Evans didn't know the guts of it, just that yesterday's briefing in a smoky Nissen hut at Thorpe Abbott's had pinpointed the field with eerie precision. Exact squadron dispositions, fuel dumps, even guard rotations. Bombs whistled free, tumbling earthward in a silver cascade, and the Bell banked hard, evading a lazy Me-109's tracers that stitched the sky like fiery lace. Far below, in the concrete warrens of Cherbourg's U-boat bunkers, the shockwaves barely registered. Admiral Karl Donitz paced the command post, a vaulted chamber lit by harsh sodium lamps that cast long shadows across steel desks, cluttered with Admiralty charts and ashtrays overflowing with cigarette butts. The air hung heavy with the brine of the nearby harbour and the oily reek of diesel vents undercut by the constant drip of condensation from the ceiling. His face, lined like weathered oak, twisted in frustration as he scanned the latest dispatches. Wolfpack Hecht, 8 boats, primed for a kill on SC-130, had vanished into the murk off Iceland, their reports sporadic, prey elusive. "Ghost convoys," he snarled to his chief of staff, Kapitän Zursee Eberhard Gott, who stood rigidly, uniform impeccable despite the humidity. Gott adjusted his cap, eyes flicking to the Tunny teleprinter humming in the corner, its perforated tape curling like a serpent. Tunny had been their lifeline since Enigma's stumbles, linking BDU headquarters to the boats with depths that should have been fathomless. Orders for Hecht, encrypted bursts detailing convoy routes cribbed from agent reports, rendezvous points in grid squares whispered only to the pack leader. Yet losses mounted. U-527 depth charged to splinters last week, her position compromised by some infernal luck. Dönitz lit a cigar, the match flaring briefly to illuminate maps marked with red pins for sunk allies, blue for his ghosts. "Feldgiebel assures me the cipher holds. Increase mu-wheel variance, no repeats." Gott nodded, signaling the cryptographer, a bespectacled lieutenant whose fingers danced over the Lorenz SZ42's keys. The machine word, 12 wheels, Chai pulsing in 5-bit fury, Pesai veiling the plaintext, mu adding chaotic depth, generating a fresh key stream. The tape spooled out. Hecht Reform Grid BM19, Shadow SC130 dawn 12th of April. Burst transmitted skyward. It arced invisibly toward Y-station antennas, bristling along the Devon cliffs. At Bletchley Park, the spring thaw had turned the grounds to mud, but inside Block F, the air simmered with the perpetual warmth of Colossus Mark Thumb's innards. Tommy Flowers, his overalls stained with solder flux, leaned against a cooling rack, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that smelled of linseed oil. The room buzzed like a hive, wrens shuttling tapes between photoelectric readers and typewriter bays, the scent of hot wax from sealing classified pouches mingling with the faint char of overworked valves. Over 2,400 tubes now glowed steadily, their blue halos casting ethereal light on faces etched with exhaustion. Joan Clark hovered over the control panel, her pencil poised above a logbook as Max Newman tweaked the bedstead switches, brass levers etched with cryptic deltas and thetas. The Hecht intercept had arrived hours earlier, plucked from the ether by a Y station at Stockland Hill, its van concealed in a spinney of oaks. The tape, still warm from the receiver, fed through Colossus's maw at blistering speed. 5,000 characters per second, slots triggering circuits that paralleled the wheel patterns in electronic frenzy. Crib in Hecht Reform. Test PSI offsets 5 to 12, Flowers directed, his voice steady over the fan's roar. Lights cascaded across the neon array, reds winking out, greens igniting like signal fires. Clark's breath caught as the decryptor clattered. Grid BM19, Shadow SC130. Torpedoes priority merchants. Full brake moo wheels yielding under the machine's assault where human minds faltered. Newman whooped softly, a rare crack in his reserve, slapping Flowers back. "She's reading live, Tommy. 90% traffic now, blindfolded." The decrypt rocketed through Ultra's veins, a red-flagged envelope to the Admiralty by tea time, where Commodore Roger Wynne pored over it in the ops room's green-shaded glow. Charts rustled under his fingers, the air thick with tea steam and the chalky dust of erasers. Route SC-130 south, escorts from EGB-7, hedgehog sweeps at predicted wolf positions. Wireless masts atop Scapa Flow crackled to life, captains on the bridge of HMS Starling, freighters ploughing the Labrador Current, receiving the nudge, alter 10 degrees, zig left at 0400. In the heaving swells, lookouts on the destroyers strained through binoculars, the salt spray lashing their oilskins, unaware of the Colossus that had mapped the shadows. By April the 12th, the trap snapped shut. Dawn broke grey over the Atlantic, fog banks rolling like smoke from a battlefield. Commander Frederick John Walker, Starling's grizzled captain, gripped the rail, his duffel coat whipping in the gale. Sonar pinged echoes, U-deep, then U-439, Hecht's van closing blind. Hedgehogs hurled their 60 lb projectiles in starburst patterns, blooms of white foam erupting as charges detonated. Depth charges followed, the sea convulsing in geysers that drenched the decks. U-527 sister boat, U-515, broached briefly, her conning tower a black silhouette before torpedoes, meant for merchants, turned inward in panic. Gott's tape had led them straight to the noose. In Cherbourg, Dönitz's cigar snapped between his teeth as the reports trickled in. 4 boats sunk, Hecht shattered. He stormed the signals room, the teleprinters were mocking him. Tunny, compromised? The cryptographer paled, but Feldgiebel's Berlin relay insisted, anomalies isolated, enhance indicators. Colonel Hans Fischer, in the OKW bunker, now a labyrinth of reinforced steel, reviewed the fallout amid the clang of typewriters and the bitter steam of ersatz coffee. His hand shook as he signed a variance order, the Lorenz beside him indifferent. Coincidence, he told a skeptical aide, but sleep evaded him that night, the bunker's hum a dirge for lost wolf packs. At Bletchley, Flowers powered down Colossus as twilight fell, the valves cooling with sighs of relief. Clark logged the Hecht kill, her neat script belying the thrill. Dozens down this quarter, ultras bleeding them. Outside, the mud squelched underfoot, nightingales trilling in the woods, oblivious to the code war's tide turning. The High Command clung to Tunny's illusion, but Colossus read on, its live gaze piercing the dark, shortening the path to victory one decrypt at a time. Thunder grumbled distant, the Atlantic's wrath ebbing under Allied eyes. July 1943. The relentless summer sun baked the Sicilian coastline, turning the azure Mediterranean into a shimmering cauldron that lapped at the hulls of Allied landing craft bobbing off the beaches near Gela. Salt spray mingled with the acrid bite of diesel exhaust and gunpowder residue from offshore barrages, the air thick enough to chew. Lieutenant Commander Jack Thompson gripped the railing of LCI-92, his sun-bleached khakis clinging to his sweat-soaked skin as the ramp dropped with a metallic groan. Waves crashed against the bow, foaming white, while ahead the low dunes bristled with Axis defenses, sandbagged machine nests and concrete pillboxes that had been eerily quiet until now. Ultra's gold, Thompson muttered to his platoon sergeant, a burly Texan named Ruiz, who hefted his Thompson submachine gun amid the clamor of engines and shouted orders. The intel briefing back in Algiers had been razor-sharp. Exact positions of the Hermann Goering Division's reserves, supply routes snaking from Messina, even the shift changes at coastal batteries. No wild guesses, just the cold precision of decrypted whispers from Berlin. You can hear the chaos building, can't you? The thunder of naval guns rolling across the water like divine judgment, shells arcing high to crater the bluffs where German spotters hunkered, their binoculars glinting briefly before the earth erupted around them. Operation Husky, the Allied boot-stamping Sicily, launched at dawn on July 10th, but the real edge came from those code-cracked secrets. Thompson's boots sank into the wet sand as he charged forward, bullets whipping the air like angry hornets, the stink of cordite sharp in his nostrils. A pillbox chattered to life 50 yards inland, but a destroyer offshore, HMS Uganda, pummeled it silent, her 6 inches guided by the very decrypts that had mapped every gun emplacement. By midday, the beachhead held, Thompson's company pushing inland past smoldering Fiat trucks, their drivers fleeing into olive groves, heavy with the scent of crushed leaves and fear. Deep in the Etna foothills, 20 miles east, Oberstleutnant Erich von Luck, commander of the 21st Panzer Division's vanguard, slammed a fist on the hood of his Kubelwagen, the dust from the gravel road still settling around the tires. The air hummed with the drone of Stuka dive bombers wheeling overhead, their sirens wailing like banshees, but the reports flooding his field HQ, a canvas tent staked amid cork oaks, painted a nightmare. "How?" he bellowed to his adjutant, Hauptmann Müller, who pored over a crumpled map stained with coffee rings. Allied landings at 5 precise points, paratroopers dropping smack on supply depots, destroyers shelling fallback positions before his troops could dig in. Von Luck's face, weathered by North African sands, flushed red under his peaked cap. The orders from OKW had been crystal: reinforce Palermo at dusk, but the Allies anticipated every countermove, as if reading the Führer's mind. The culprit pulsed from a portable Lorenz machine in the tent's corner, its whir muffled by the canvas flaps slapping in the Sirocco wind. Tunny links from Berlin. Vital directives for the Italian front, encrypted with PSI wheels offset by 29. MU generators randomized via monthly tables, had flowed unchecked until now. Muller glanced at the teleprinter, its tape curling lazily. Feldgiebel's assurance holds, Herr Oberstleutnant. The English flail blindly. But von Luck wasn't buying it. His panzers, meant to crush the beachheads, bogged in ambushes, fuel convoys strafed by P-38 Lightnings appearing from nowhere. He lit a cigarette, the match trembling, inhaling the harsh tobacco that did little to mask the underlying rot of doubt. A runner burst in, breathless. Allies at Licata, faster than predicted, reserves scattered. Von Luck crushed the cigarette under his boot, the acrid smoke lingering like a bad omen. Back at Bletchley Park, the July heatwave turned Block F into a sweltering inferno, the air stagnant with the mingled odors of overheated solder, stale tea, and the faint metallic tang of ozone from Colossus's valves. Tommy Flowers mopped his brow with a handkerchief already damp, his eyes fixed on the machine's glowing heart. Now over 2,500 tubes in Mark Wern's expanded frame, augmented by a second rack jury-rigged from Dollis Hill spares. The room thrummed with activity, wrens in light summer dresses fanning themselves as they shuttled tapes, the clatter of typewriters punctuating the fan's relentless whine. Joan Clark adjusted a bedstead switch, her fingers precise despite the sweat trickling down her spine, while Max Newman scribbled wheel patterns on a chalkboard smeared with erasures. Sicily traffic spiking, Berlin to Rome, every hour, Clark said, feeding a fresh intercept into the reader. Stations at Ventnor and Scarborough had netted a bonanza, bursts coordinating Axis evacuations, troop redeployments masked as exercise maneuvers. The tape whirred through at ferocious speed, photoelectric cells triggering circuits that dissected Tunny's depths in parallel fury. Flowers paced the narrow aisle between racks, his pipe clenched unlit. Crib, Husky counter, PSI Delta 14, MU test 3045. Lights erupted across the neon panel. A symphony of greens blooming amid fading reds, the decryptor hammering out plaintext like a telegraph on steroids. 21st Panzer to Gela, fuel at Catania Bridge, Luftwaffe cover at 0600. Full break in under 20 minutes, the MU wheels cracking where earlier versions stuttered. Newman leaned in, spectacles slipping. Live read, Tommy, 90% depth, even with their variance tweaks. Cheers rippled softly through the team, a wren named Betty passing around lukewarm lemonade in tin mugs, the citrus a brief relief from the heat. The decrypts fueled Husky's fire. By July 11th, General Patton's 7th Army veered east, slicing through von Luck's lines at Licata, tanks rumbling over dusty tracks while P-40 Warhawks pounced on Goering Division convoys, their 50 caliber rounds chewing through Mercedes staff cars. In Algiers' ops room, a vaulted chamber alive with the click of teletype and the murmur of staff officers, General Walter Bedell Smith traced the advances on a wall map, pins shifting like chess pieces. Ultras turning the boot into a rout, Kesselring's blind. The intel flowed red-tabbed to Montgomery's desert rats, who seized Syracuse intact, Italian garrisons surrendering en masse, their radios falling silent under white flags waving in the breeze. In Berlin's OKW bunker, the fallout hit like a Stuka dive. Colonel Hans Fischer, his uniform wilted in the humid August previews, stood before a cluster of grim-faced generals in a map room reeking of sweat and stale cigars. Erich Feldgiebel, signals chief, loomed like a storm cloud, his dueling scar livid. Sicily lost in weeks, every order anticipated. Tunny? Fisher swallowed hard, the air conditioning's hum mocking his unease. Logs showed no breaches, Wheels change per protocol, but anomalies piled. 70% of high-level traffic yielding coincidental Allied responses. "Enhance encryption! Add indicator wheels," Felgiebel ordered, slamming a fist on the oak table. The adjacent Lorenz whirred to life, but Fischer's hand lingered on the tape, doubt coiling like smoke. Hitler raged in the Wolf's Lair that night, per dispatches demanding heads for the betrayal. Die at Bletchley, as Colossus cooled under shaded bulbs, Flowers shared a rare smile with Clark. Mark II, blueprints ready, double the speed for Normandy. Outside, the estate's lawns shimmered in the sunset. Crickets chirping oblivious to the Code War's pivot. Sicily's fall cracked the Axis spine, Ultra's vein richer than ever, Tunny's secrets spilling like blood. In the Mediterranean's churning wake, von Luck's panzers burned, their commanders adrift in a fog of their own making. The Colossus read on, its gaze unblinking, the High Command's fortress crumbling one decrypt at a time. Distant artillery echoed from newsreels, the war's tide surging Allied. June 6, 1944. The pre-dawn murk clung to the English Channel like a shroud, waves slapping against the steel hulls of troopships anchored off the Isle of Wight, their anchors' chains rattling in the swell. Salt spray stung the faces of soldiers huddled on the decks of HMS Empire Javelin, the air thick with the mingled reek of seasickness, machine oil, and the faint, acrid whiff of unburned fuel from idling Liberty engines. Private Eddie Malone, a lanky farm boy from Iowa clutching his M1 Garand, peered over the rail into the blackness, his breath fogging in the chill. The horizon swallowed the first hints of grey light, but the real tension hummed in the wireless shack below, where signals officers pored over fresh decrypts under red-shaded lamps, their fingers smudged with pencil lead. You can feel the anticipation thrumming through the ship, can't you? The deck vibrating under your boots from the generators, every creak of the rigging a whisper of the storm to come, as if the sea itself knows the scales are tipping. Operation Overlord loomed, the greatest armada ever assembled, 5,000 vessels churning toward Normandy. But its success hinged on shadows pierced by light from Bletchley. Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, in the bridge house of his flagship, traced routes on a chart table slick with condensation, his pipe smoke curling toward the bulkheads. Ultras nailed Rommel's reserves, 21st Panzer at Caen, but bottled by our feints. The intel, stamped top-secret Ultra in red ink, detailed every Tunny burst, Berlin's frantic reallocations, Kesselring's fallback lines from Italy, even Hitler's own musings on the invasion's inevitable sector. Deep in the Reich's underbelly, the OKW bunker near Rastenburg thrummed with frantic energy, the air stale and heavy with the sweat of overworked staffers and the bitter tang of ersatz coffee brewing in dented urns. Colonel Hans Fischer, his eyes hollowed by months of anomalies, hunched over a Lorenz SZ42 in the signals vault, its 12 wheels, now augmented with frantic indicator tweaks, spinning in desperate harmony. The machines were blended with the distant rumble of V2 test firings echoing through the pine forests outside. General Alfred Jodl paced nearby, his boots scuffing the concrete floor, face flushed under the harsh fluorescence. Invasion imminent. Where? Pas-de-Calais holds the bulk per agents. But doubt festered. Sicily's rout had been the first fracture. Wolfpack shattered in the Atlantic, the bleeding wound. Tunny tapes piled on Fischer's desk, orders for the 15th Army to shadow phantom fleets, Luftwaffe squadrons redeployed to empty skies. Fischer fed a fresh plain text into the cipher. Directives for Atlantic wall batteries, PSI wheels offset by 37, MU depths layered with false trails, but his hand faltered on the lever. Felgiebel was gone, executed after the July plot. His warnings about English sorcery dismissed as treason. Now anomalies screamed 95% of high-level traffic yielding Allied counters, as if Berlin's thoughts bled into enemy hands. Secure, Fisher muttered to his aide, a gaunt lieutenant whose uniform hung loose from rationed meals. The tape spooled out, burst to a transmitter in occupied Denmark, arcing skyward on invisible wings toward Y-station antennas at Cheadle, their operators in windowless huts twisting dials amid the hum of receivers and the scent of hot bakelight. At Bletchley Park, the June night had surrendered to a frenzy in Block F, where Colossus Mark II, now a twin-headed behemoth of 4,000 valves, racks towering like cathedral spires, devoured intercepts with insatiable hunger. Tommy Flowers, his face gaunt from chain-smoked cigarettes, adjusted the master panel, the air electric with ozone and the faint char of a near-burnout tube. Fans roared overhead, stirring papers weighted with ashtrays, while Joan Clark and Max Newman flanked the tape reader, their shadows dancing on walls papered with circuit diagrams. The Denmark burst arrived via secure courier just after midnight, its 5-bit pulses a tangled storm on the perforated strip. Crib, Overlord Deception, Test Chi Full, Peace-Eye Deltas 2035, Flowers barked, his cockney edge sharpened by exhaustion. Rensin headsets relayed, Y-station confirms, the room alive with the clatter of typewriters and muffled exclamations. The machine lunged, photoelectric slots triggering cascades of electrons, counters paralleling Tunny's logic at 25,000 characters per second, 10 times the original's fury. Lights blazed across the expanded neon array, greens overwhelming reds in a victorious aurora. Clark's voice cut through the din. Full decrypt, 15th Army to Calais, reserves static at Normandy. Rommel's panzers idled. Newman punched a fist into his palm, spectacles askew, as the typewriter spat plaintext, battery coordinates, troop dispositions, even fuel shortages crippling counterattacks. In under 10 minutes, the break was sealed, Mew wheels yielding like wet paper under the Colossus's gaze. Flowers stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, the heat radiating from the valves like a forge's breath. She's live and lethal, every pulse from Berlin, ours now. The decrypt surged through Ultra's arteries, red-tabbed dossiers to Schaeff headquarters in Bushy Park, where Eisenhower's planners, huddled around baize-covered tables amid the scent of fresh mimeographs, shifted pins on master maps. Hold the feints, fortitude's gold, General Bedell Smith noted, his voice steady over the rustle of orders. By 0400, the Armada weighed anchor, destroyers like HMS Warspite slicing the chop toward Utah Beach, their radars blind to threats thanks to pinpointed U-boat pens. In the channel's heaving grey, paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne tumbled from C-47s over Sainte-Mère-Église, gliders crashing into hedgerows with splintering booms, their drops guided to bypass flak traps decrypted hours before. Omaha's bloodbath was brutal, waves crashing red with surf and shrapnel. But inland, the 4th Infantry pushed unmolested, Rommel's divisions late and leaderless, their commanders scrambling for orders that never came. In Rastenburg, dawn brought chaos. Jodel's face drained as reports flooded the bunker, landings at 5 beaches, paratroopers seizing bridges intact, the Atlantic wall crumbling like sandcastles. "Tunny betrayed!" he roared, slamming the table so the coffee urn rattled. Fisher stared at the silent Lorenz, its wheels frozen, the air conditioning's chill no match for the sweat beading on his neck. Aide after aide burst in. Panzers engage piecemeal. Allies know our depths. Hitler, roused from fitful sleep in the Wolf's Lair annex, demanded explanations, his voice echoing through vents like thunder. Fisher drafted variance orders, desperate, futile, but the High Command's fortress had fallen. By D+1, 150,000 allies ashore, von Luck's 21st Panzer bogged in ambushes, Luftwaffe sorties flying into P-51 Mustangs vectored by ultra-ghosts. Across the Atlantic's corpse-strewn graves, the Wolfpack's end came swift. May's decrypts had sunk dozens more. U-505 captured off Morocco, her Enigma and fallback codes pried open, but Tunny's veil torn wider. Dönitz, in his Flensburg redoubt, paced amid shattered models of sunk boats, the air reeking of damp wool and defeat. Untouchable, they said, he growled to Gott, who salvaged logs from a smouldering safe. Convoy after convoy steamed unscathed, Liberty ships delivering the sinews of war, tanks for the Bulge, fuel for the Rhine, while U-boats ghosted empty seas, depth charges blooming where packs once prowled. By V-Day, May 8, 1945, the bunker's lights flickered out. Fischer, surviving the purge, watched Berlin burn from a foxhole. The Lorenzes were silenced forever. At Bletchley, flowers powered down the Colossus for the last time, valves cooling in the spring air filtering through open windows, Clark logging the final break amid cheers and tears. Ultra, born from codewords on paper, had cut years from the war, sank dozens of wolf packs, turned the tide with invisible ink. In the quiet aftermath, as nightingales sang over the estate's lawns, the secret held, a Colossus sleeping until the world awoke to its roar. The High Command's untouchable sword lay broken, read live by eyes of light.